Aaron Brightman here, Scholar Faithful Podcast. I did not do a rapid reaction after Rutgers lost to Indiana on Thursday. True confession, I've been pretty beat up the last few days. I look terrible. I've have a flare-up with a pinched nerve, muscle strain, getting old, and I've been in a lot of pain the last few days. So I went to bed after the disappointing performance by Rutgers, but wanted to put something out here on Friday about this. Obviously, Dylan Harper not playing threw a wrench into the plans for this game, and that was a big part of it. But at the same time, the performance in which Rutgers put forth was not acceptable for several reasons. And the thing I tweeted before the game, before knowing that Dylan was not in the game or was going to play, was that many times over the last few years when Rutgers won 9 of its last 11 meetings going into last night against Indiana, Indiana had the more talented roster. You could argue that one year where Rutgers went to the NCAA tournament, beat Indiana 3 times, they were more talented. But if you look at star rankings and all that, I still don't know if that was the case. But my point is, Rutgers historically has been the tougher team as a whole and when playing Indiana. And to me, that's what I thought a big key in winning last night was, and the biggest disappointment in how Rutgers played, because they were not the tougher team when you allow 18 offensive rebounds. And Indiana, the ball game was, as frustrating as it was for Indiana to go off from 3, which was a problem, and we'll talk about that. The fact that they allowed 34 second chance points. Indiana only shot 39% from the field, of 24 on layups. It was the second chance opportunities that Indiana won the game. Rutgers got initial stops. They could not keep Indiana off the glass. And we've seen this pop up time and time again. Pike will bring it up once again in the postgame, how they out-rebounded Texas A&M, which is one of the best rebounded teams in the country. That's true. But it just hasn't been there. And, part of it, too, is playing the zone, which Rutgers did, I think, more against Indiana than they have this season. I could be wrong about that, but they definitely played a lot of zone. Peggle talked about it also after the game. They've been working on it a lot. That makes defensive rebounding more difficult, but it's an effort thing. It's a mentality thing, and it just wasn't there. And it's a toughness thing. And Rutgers did not have that. And when you're missing your best player, that you have to have that. You have to have that on the road in any Big Ten environment, but particularly in that type of game. And that was very, very frustrating and disappointing to see that they just got manhandled on the glass once again. Total rebounds, they were minus 12, but they were even on the defensive rebound 30 to 29. But Indiana had 11 more shots in the game because they had 11 more offensive rebounds. And even though Rutgers shot 44% from the field, Indiana shot 39%. They won by 10, in part because another thing I said before the game was I thought with Harper out, Rutgers needed to win that 3-point differential. Indiana was shot just 19% from 3 the previous 3 games coming in. They were 1 of 20 the game before. And, of course, they shoot their best of the season, 12 of 27 for 44% from 3. Now, I do think part of the issue, and I'm not arguing that Rutgers had a bad break because Malik Renew left the game in the first minute. I was most worried about Malik Renew in this game, more so than Umar Ballo, who did play well, and we'll talk about that. But Malik Renew leaving the game injured and not returning changed how Indiana had to play. And the preparation that Peichel and the team went into, it kind of went out the window because it actually, and some Indiana fans have argued that, it didn't really make sense, I thought, that Indiana added Ballo to Renew to have to play 2 bigs all the time, because for a team that doesn't really shoot threes particularly well over the last few years, it doesn't help with your spacing, right? And it takes another shooter off the floor. But that's what you saw in this game with Renew out. They only played with Ballo. They played Goody as kind of the 4, who's, their best 3-point shooter. And it changed the way they played, and it improved their offensive flow. Now, credit to Indiana for maximizing that and recognizing that, and a minus for Rutgers not being able to adjust. They need to be able to adjust. But I'm just saying, I think that was a factor, and Rutgers could never adjust from there. And again, that's on coaching. Peichel's got to figure something out. Now, in terms of the defense, again, they weren't closing out on threes. but I don't think they were a sieve inside in terms of that initial stop. They were getting the initial stops. It was just the glass. There was no intensity there, and that just let this game slip away. I mean, they had that, when Ace was just absolutely unconscious in the first half, and they had a little bit of flow to them. Acuff hit a three. They were up 26-19, and then Indiana regrouped. They finished the half on a 22-8 run. I mean, Leal with that just acrobatic turnaround, no-look bank three at the buzzer was a killer. Went from 4-7 at the half. I think that really hurt them. And I also think, Woodson made a good call bringing in Leal on Bailey at the end of that first half. He ended up going 1 of 6, I think, on Leal at the end of the first half after that hot start. But Bailey just, he's unbelievable. 16-29 from the floor, 39 points, 4 of 8 from 3. Was frustrating from the line, but I think it's just kind of a mental thing. It's like he's so athletic and talented that he can make these acrobatic shots because he has to be in motion, and these stationary shots he's struggling from. But it's, he's obviously going to work on it. But 8 rebounds for him. Listen, he tried to carry them. He's a supremely talented player, and the supporting cast did not give him enough help. They did not give him enough support. And I think that's, really the nuts of this is that, I've seen a lot of comments about people saying, Pikiell's roster construction is a failure and all that. And listen, they're obviously missing. It's not gelling, right? It's not gelling. I thought Somerville, I really liked the way he competed against Ballo. Obviously, Ballo got the best of him at times, but Somerville also got some stops at times. He also attacked him offensively. He was fearless, and he was super competitive against him, and that was really encouraging to see. And listen, he's one of their most offensively efficient players overall. Somerville 3 of 3 from the floor, 2 of 2 from the line, 8 points, 5 rebounds. Overall. 26 minutes for Somerville. They were -2 with him in the game. So I just think going back to roster construction, we could talk about the limitations of the NIL and all that, but Pikiell built a team that needs to score, right? That's their strength based on who you brought in. And Hayes and Martini let them down last night. They were 0-7 from 3. They have to be able to come in and hit threes. I also think their flow is off, their rhythm is off because of the way they've been utilized. So my biggest criticism of Pikiell is not how he built the roster, it's how he's utilizing the roster he built. And I still think he's clinging to the fact that this team is going to be able to hold teams to under 70 points and become a really good rebounding team. And I just don't know if that's ever going to happen. I think they defended better last night than people give them credit for. Obviously, they weren't closing out on threes, and that was a problem. But I thought interior defense was better than expected. Part of that was Renew not playing. But I think there needs to be a philosophical kind of look at things. Now that you have a 3-game homestand that you have to win at least 2 to stay in this thing. You have Wisconsin on Monday, you have Purdue the following Thursday, and then you have UCLA. You have to, I think you really need to win those first 2. I think UCLA is the hardest opponent of those 3. And, if Wisconsin loses to Iowa on Friday, they're going to be desperate to win that game too. And they can shoot a ton of threes. They space the floor. Can Rutgers learn from that? I mean, part of this too is that defensively, Rutgers had 3 steals in the game. That they're not creating enough turnovers. I thought their size and athleticism on the perimeter would be able to create more disruption for opponents. That's not happening. And it's not I don't mean this as a criticism of Durkak and J. Mike and even J. Will, who are perimeter-oriented defensive guards, I think more than anything. But it's not making a tremendous difference consistently on a defensive perspective. And I think if it were me, the way I would look at things, and I see people, destroying the transfers today and saying, the portal, all the forward transfers are terrible. Listen, you need to maximize Tyson Acuff. He is as polished a scorer as you have outside of Dylan and Ace. You need to maximize that. And, he got some run last night in this game. He played 20 minutes. He was 3 of 7 on the floor, 7 points, 1 of 3 from 3, had a couple boards. His defense, he's not the best defender. He did make a great defensive play in transition that saved an easy bucket. He knocked the ball off. I forget who had the ball for Indiana. It went off his knee, but that was a very heady play that he made. He's a veteran player. He knows how to play basketball. He knows how to space the floor. And I just think if it were me right now looking at this team, the adjustments I would make is I would start Acuff and I would start Somerville. And along with J-Will, Ace, and Dillon. And those are, I think, your 5 best from an offensive perspective. Obviously, you play J-Mike and Dirk Hack off the bench. I think you can't give up on Hayes or Martini either. But I think if you can get kind of a more cohesive rotation with your starters and your bench and kind of redefine roles, I mean, you got to do something at this point. I think you're at a serious crossroads in the season. If you don't win 2 of 3 at home in this next stretch, it's going to be very, very hard for Rutgers to come back and get back into contention for March NCAA tournament. If you can win all 3 at home, you're right back in it. So I just think philosophically there has to be a shift, because I think you could criticize the roster construction. It certainly wasn't perfect. I do think there were some limitations there, but I'm much more of looking at, you can't fix the roster construction right now. So what can you fix? You can fix how you're playing, how you're utilizing that roster. And I think you need to try to score as many points as possible in every game moving forward. And you just have to embrace that philosophy. And that doesn't mean you just give up on defense and rebounding, but I think that it's almost like this team is fighting itself. What are they? What are they best suited to be? And what are they trying to be? And is that the same thing? And respectfully, I don't think that that's meshing. And I think that that's a big part of this. Now, obviously, Dillon not playing is a huge part of them not winning at Indiana. I mean, you could look at it a bunch of different ways. I mean, they lost by 10. But Ace had to play out of his mind. I mean, if Ace has a poor shooting night, I mean, they lose by 25. And credit to Peichel, he called a timeout. They were down 18. He was furious. He finally, kind of unleashed on this team a little bit, at least publicly, showed some emotion, and they generated, I think it was a 12-0 run right away, and played with passion. And I think that's the other thing, is this team is just, they've been inconsistent in the passion in which they've played with. And it just, again, I think part of that is mentality in terms of how they're being utilized. They don't, it's not that they're not on the same page. It's not that they're not playing hard. They are playing hard, but it's like they're not playing to their strengths. So something's missing out there. And I think that that's holding them back. So listen, I don't know if that would work, but all the comments today about roster construction, that for me is more of like a deep dive after the season. The roster is the roster. How can you get the most out of what you have right now? And listen, Tyson Acuff, I mean, the funny thing is as poor as Martini and Hayes have shot recently, Acuff is shooting 38% from 3. Hayes and Martini are shooting 36%. Dillon's shooting 37%. I mean, it's wild that Rutgers has 4 shooters over 35% from 3. They've never had that in so many years. Maybe back to the Gary Waters days. I don't even know if they had 4. And they're losing because they can't play defense. But again, they're not leaning into that strength enough. They're not maximizing their strengths. You have guys that can shoot threes. Acuff is a polished scorer. You got to, and I think people get mad when I say this, and football, rightfully so, a ton of injuries, and that should be considered in evaluating that team. I think people do not put enough onus on Acuff breaking his foot, J-Will injuring his shoulder. I think those 2 factors have definitely impacted this season, but it's time to just, Acuff's got to go. Like, you got to let him play, and he's got to play a lot, I think, because he can add a lot to this team as a scorer. Jay Will has been very inconsistent. He played hard last night. I mean, he had 8 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists in 30 minutes. But he hasn't been that consistent third scorer. Having Acuff in there with him and Dillon, I think, makes it a little bit more difficult for the defense. You know, they have size there in the backcourt, 2 6'4" guys with Dillon. And then you have Ace and Somerville up front. You know, again, it's not their best defensive line. I mean, Ace showed something defensively last night, too. He had 4 blocks and a steal. It's a work in progress, but time's running out. And I just think there needs to be some type of shift in approach, because the way they looked last night, the supporting cast just wasn't enough, and they looked out of sorts. It just wasn't working. And Indiana's not even that good. And that's what was so frustrating. It seemed like a very winnable game. And they were unable to really, you know, they showed some fight at times, but they were unable to seriously threaten down the stretch. And they looked out of sorts. And they just, again, got destroyed on the glass on the offensive end, and that was a huge problem. But again, you shot 6 of 21 from 3. Indiana, 12 of 27. So they were minus 18 from 3. I said before the game, I thought they needed to win that differential. They got destroyed on it. And that was a big part of it. Yes, they missed some free throws. They were 14 to 23 overall. I mean, a big part of that was Ace. Everybody else would, you know, only missed. Somerville was 2 of 2. J. Will was 3 of 4. Dirk Hack was 3 of 4. J. Mike was 3 of 4. So, you know, listen, I'm not going to belabor that point too much, because Ace was just fantastic in every other facet. Those, you know, fadeaway threes, just he's an immense talent. And I know there's some debate going on about, you know, that having 2 5-stars and, you know, they need to have a more balanced, you know, spend all your money on 4 stars or whatever, and listen, this is a unique season in how Rutgers got Ace and Dillon. They didn't get them because Rutgers has the most NIL. They got them because of relationships. And the bottom line is they haven't gotten enough help. And yes, roster construction is part of it, but I also think the way in which the roster was constructed, you have to look at how you're utilizing them. And I think you have to make an adjustment. And, you know, perhaps there's other adjustments you can make there, you know. And I someone told me on Rivals, you know, I'm getting criticized for being positive on Martini before the year. I mean, everybody was. Nobody thought that was a bad pickup. And, you know, listen, he's played a lot worse than I thought he would. And it's disappointing. And, you know, I feel for the guy because he's a really good guy. He's a leader. But again, there's no good in giving up on your offensive-minded players, right? It's just, I think, how do you get the most out of them? Because you have to look at the whole picture. And shooters need to shoot. Shooters need to shoot in the flow of the offense. And rightfully so, people are criticizing that the offense just looks out of sorts. It looks disjointed. It doesn't look like there's any flow or purpose at times. You know, I don't think there's enough kind of set screens happening, enough intention in terms of getting certain shooters certain looks. I think that's completely valid. So, listen, at the end of the day, this is not going the way anybody wanted it to. And it's on Steve Peichel and the coaching staff that they're in this position and that they have to figure this out now. And if you don't figure it out soon, it's going to be a lost season. I think it's too early to give up. Again, they have this huge 3-game homestand coming up, 2 Q2 games with Wisconsin and Purdue, and then a Q1 game against UCLA. Your next 13, 14 are all against Q1, Q2 opponents. So while Indiana was disappointing and kind of signaled some red flags, at the same time, the season is still in front of them in terms of turning things around. But with every loss, it starts to slip away a little bit at a time. And before you know it, it's February and you're completely out of contention and there is no hope left. So how do you get back? Obviously, Peichel was pretty adamant in the postgame that Dillon was sick and he'll be back on Monday for Wisconsin. That obviously would be huge for this team. You know, they look like they made progress with those 9 days off and playing Columbia, but that's Columbia. Now it's Big Ten play. They did not look the part against Indiana, and that was super Disappointing, again, going back to the lack of toughness and the lack of passion on a consistent basis from this team. Now, nothing cures that better than playing 3 straight games of the rack, because if you beat Wisconsin, each game is going to get crazier and crazier. And I know many Rutgers fans are frustrated. I also know many Rutgers fans are not going to give up on this team if they give them reasons to not. And that is turning things around. And it has to happen really quickly here. So my biggest takeaway is Acuff needs to be a bigger focal point to what they're doing. I thought Somerville's showing promise. He needs to box out with the same intensity that he attacks the basket with the ball. I thought his defense was solid at times against Ballo, but he's not a good enough rebounder. He needs to rebound better, but he's got a ton of potential. And I think where he is today to where he could be a month from now, even, he could really make some strides quickly here. I think Acuff and Somerville have to be prioritized. I think that second unit needs to get some consistency and flow together. And you need to establish some type of consistent rhythm for your shooters. And you got to shoot threes. As a whole, listen, even though Ace was 16 of 29, the rest of the team was 11 of 32. Not a good percentage whatsoever. A big reason for that was 2 of 13 from 3 from the rest of the team, let him down. But in terms of shooting-wise, they were 5-11 from 2. Not great, but not terrible. And overall, they were 10 of 16 on layups, which, again, is not good enough, but it's not terrible. It's right around 60%. So they struggled from 3. And there's just not enough swinging of the ball, reversals, flow, purpose. And again, they were missing their floor general and Harper. So that was a part of it. But this team needs to figure out its identity, and they need to embrace it, and they need to prioritize it. Because right now, what they're trying to be, I don't think it's best suited for what they actually can be. And again, it's completely different philosophy for Peichel. It's always been defensive rebounding, but you may need to just try to score 90 plus every night to win. And you know what? They have offensive talent on this team to do that. So again, that's just my 2 cents. It's no disrespect intended towards the coaching staff. I might be completely wrong, but I just think at this point, every loss starts to slip away. And if we're waiting for this team to be a top 25 defensive team, I don't think that's going to happen. If we're waiting for this team to be a top 75 rebounding team, I don't think that's going to happen. But can this team elevate its play through utilizing its offensive weapons in a more effective way? That's the path I see. We'll see what happens. Rutgers hosts Wisconsin on Monday. I will try to do another pod before then, as I'm, I think, on the mend here with my my flare up. And appreciate everyone listening and watching. And Happy New Year. And don't give up on this team yet. Obviously, plenty of reasons for concern. I understand all the frustration and upsetness, and you can be upset at me too. It's okay. It comes with the territory. I'm frustrated too. And this team should be playing better than they are. And losing to Indiana is always pretty upsetting, because I always feel like Rutgers should be the tougher team against Indiana, and they were not on Thursday night. And that resulted in a 10-point loss. Thanks so much for listening and watching once again here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast.